Take the photo. Now, stand here and put your arm around him, you ridiculous tin man, and take the photo, or so help me I will have your job by lunchtime. I was 4 feet away when the big man said it, and I will tell you the truth, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because of the way he said it, the way a person says a thing they have never once in their life had refused. I had been standing at the black and gold railing of the palace forecourt for 20 minutes with my own daughter's small hand in mine, watching the king's guard the way every parent there was watching him, the way you watch a thing that does not seem entirely real. The red wool tunic. The tall black bearskin pulled low over the brow, the white gloves on the rifle. The chin held at an angle no neck of mine could hold for 30 seconds, let alone 3 hours. He was a young man, I think, though it was hard to be sure under all that ceremony, broad through the shoulders, jaw shaved to the bone, eyes fixed on a point above all our heads as if he were looking at something the rest of us could not see. And in front of him, red in the face, was a father who had decided the soldier was a prop he had paid for. I have thought about that morning many times since. I have a son of my own now, born the next spring, and there are mornings I stand at my own gate and find myself standing the way that guard stood, though no one has ever asked me to. So let me tell it the way it happened, because the loud part is the part everyone remembers, and the loud part is not the part that mattered. The big man's name I never learned, and I am glad of it, because a name would make him a particular person, and the truth is I have met 100 of him. He wore the kind of clothes that are quiet on purpose, a soft gray coat, a watch you could buy a car with, shoes that had never once been wet. He had come to the forecourt the way some men come to a cathedral, not to be moved by it but to be photographed in front of it. And he had a boy with him. The boy was the thing I could not stop looking at, even before any of it began. He was small, 6, maybe 7. He had his father's coat in miniature, a gray wool thing buttoned to the throat, and he stood half a step behind the man's leg with the particular stillness of a child who has learned that the safest place to be is unnoticed. He was not crying. He was not misbehaving. He was doing the most heartbreaking thing a child can do in a loud place, which is to make himself very small and very quiet and hope the loudness passes over him like weather. His eyes were enormous. He kept them on the cobblestones. "Did you hear me?" the father said to the guard, louder now because the soldier had not moved. "I said take a photo with my son. He wants a photo with the soldier. Don't you, Marcus? Tell him you want a photo." He reached back without looking and pushed the boy forward by the shoulder, the way you'd push open a door. "Go on, stand by him." The boy stumbled half a step toward the rifle, toward the towering red figure, and froze. I watched the small chest going up and down too fast. He did not want the photo. Anyone with eyes could see he did not want the photo. He wanted to be home, or wherever home was, or at the very least back behind his father's leg where the weather could not reach him. And the guard did not move. Of course he did not move. That is the whole point of him. I should explain, for anyone who has never stood at one of those railings, what you are actually looking at. You are looking at a man under orders not to react. Not to flinch, not to speak, not to turn his head, not to acknowledge that you exist, until the one moment his duty tells him to. He is not being rude. He is being something most of us have forgotten how to be, which is faithful to a thing larger than the loud man in front of him. The crowd at the rail understood this dimly, the way you understand a language you don't speak. Most of the parents there were keeping their own children back a respectful half-step, murmuring, "See how still he is, see how he doesn't even blink." They had brought their sons and daughters to see exactly this. The stillness was the gift. The stillness was the whole show. The big man did not see a gift. He saw a machine that was malfunctioning. "Hello," he waved a hand in front of the bearskin. "Anybody home? I'm talking to you." He turned to the crowd then, performing the way that kind of man always plays to the room. "Look at this. I'm trying to give my kid a nice memory, and this one's too important to move, too important for a 6-year-old. He laughed, and a couple of people laughed with him, the nervous laugh you give a man who is making everyone uncomfortable. "Come on, mate. One photo, smile. It's not the crown jewels. The guard's eyes did not leave the point above our heads. I want to tell you what I noticed because I have replayed it so many times. I noticed that the soldier's gaze, fixed and forward as it was, had a destination. It was not the dead stare of a man switched off. It was the live stare of a man holding still on purpose, the way a man holds his breath underwater, counting. And once, just once, and I would have missed it if my own daughter hadn't been pulling at my coat asking why the man was shouting, the soldier's eyes dropped. Not to the father, not to the watch or the coat or the performance. They dropped for less than a second to the small gray shape of the boy and then went back up to their point in the sky. I don't think anyone else saw it. The father certainly didn't. He was too busy being insulted. "Right," he said, and his voice changed. It got quieter, which is always worse. "Okay, I see how it is. You think because you've got a costume on you can ignore people. You think this little game makes you better than a man who could buy this whole street." He stepped in close to the railing, closer than the polite distance, closer than the brass plate that says "Do not touch the king's guard," and he jabbed a finger up at the unmoving face. "I have asked you nicely. My son asked you nicely. Now you are going to step over here, you are going to put your arm around him, and you are going to take the photo he wants. Or I promise you, I will make a phone call and you will be cleaning latrines by the weekend. Do you understand me?" And here is the thing. The boy, little Marcus, in his small gray coat, had started to cry. Not loudly. He was crying the way the quiet ones cry, which is the worst, with his face very still and the tears just running down it and his breath catching. He was crying because his father was shouting, and a giant in a fur hat was being threatened, and somehow, in the way children always do, he had decided it was his fault. He had asked for the photo, hadn't he? Some part of that small mind had translated the whole ugly scene into "I caused this. I made my father angry. The soldier is in trouble, and it is because of me." He stood there in the middle of it, between the railing and his father's leg, and he wept silently and looked at no one. I started to move. I'll be honest with you about that. I started to move because I am a father and there was a crying child 6 feet from me and a man losing control of himself, and the thing in your chest just takes over. I let go of my daughter's hand and I took one step. I did not get to take a second. Because the king's guard had begun to move. It was not what the father wanted. It was not the surrender he had been demanding. The soldier did not slump out of his stance and shuffle over for a snapshot. What he did was far stranger and far more deliberate, and the whole rail went quiet watching it, the kind of quiet that falls over a crowd when it senses that something it doesn't understand is about to happen. He executed a turn, a real one, the kind they drill 10,000 times until the body does it without the man. His rifle came up against his shoulder with a single clean motion. His heel struck the stone, and he pivoted not toward the father, not toward the railing, but a precise 90 degrees, the heavy boots cracking down on the cobbles in 2 reports that I felt in my own chest. Crack, crack. The bearskin swung. The whole red mass of him turned like a door closing, and for one absurd second I thought he was marching away, abandoning the post, walking off the way you'd walk away from a man not worth answering. The father thought so too. "That's right," he crowed, "off you go, you." And then the guard halted, and executed a second turn, and came back the other way, and I realized he had not been marching off at all. He had been doing the thing the sentries do, the slow patrol along the line of the post, the measured paces to the end of the beat and back, except he had begun it now in the middle of all this, with a purpose I did not yet understand. He marched the length of his post, boots ringing, rifle high, the perfect machine the father had mocked, and at the far end of the beat he turned again and came back, and on the way back his line brought him level with the small gray shape of the crying boy. And there, level with the child, he stopped. He did not look down at the boy. He could not. To look down at a person on duty, to acknowledge them with his eyes, would have been exactly the breach the father had been screaming for, and the soldier was not going to give that man 1 inch of his victory. But a sentry on his beat has a small grammar of motions that are his to use, and the king's guard used them now, in front of all of us, with a control that I have never forgotten. He brought his rifle down from his shoulder to the order, the butt of it settling on the stone beside his right boot with a soft, final tap. It is the smallest thing. It is the posture a sentry takes when he is at rest at his post, a thing the regulations allow him, a thing that means in the language of the parade ground I am standing easy, I am at peace, there is nothing here that alarms me. To the father it meant nothing. To the boy, and I watched this land on the boy's wet face like sunlight coming out, it meant the giant had stopped being a frightening machine and become, somehow, a man standing quietly nearby. The rifle was no longer up. The rifle was at rest. The fur hat was no longer towering over an argument. It was just there, beside him, the way a tree is beside you, the way something large and steady is beside you and asks nothing. And then the guard did the only thing left that was his to do, the one motion in all his disciplined grammar that could reach a frightened child without breaking the post or surrendering to the man. He came to attention, slowly, the full ceremony of it drawn out so that every eye on the rail could read it, heels together, spine straight, and his white-gloved hand came off the rifle and rose and he saluted. Not the father. The father was nothing to him, the father did not exist. He saluted the boy. He brought his hand up in the full present, the salute you give to a king, to the colors, to the honored dead, the salute that in 300 years of that post had never once been wasted on a man in a soft gray coat with a watch worth a car. And he gave it, in front of all of us, to a weeping 6-year-old in a wool coat who had spent the whole morning trying to disappear. He held it. He held the salute the way you hold a door open for someone whose arms are full, a beat longer than necessary, so there could be no mistaking it, so the boy would have time to understand that it was for him. I have tried since to put into words what that salute said, and the best I have managed is this. It said, "You are not in trouble." It said, "None of this is your fault." It said, "I see you, small soldier, standing your ground in the middle of a storm you did not make, and I want you to know that I think you are the bravest person at this railing." The guard could not say a word. He was forbidden every word. So he said it the only way a man of pure discipline has left to say anything. He spent the most precious thing he owned, the thing he was sworn never to spend cheaply, and he spent it on the one person there who needed it. The boy stopped crying. It was the strangest thing to watch. The tears were still wet on his face, but the catching breath steadied, and the small chest slowed, and the enormous eyes came up off the cobblestones for the first time since I'd been watching him, and went to the saluting soldier, and the boy did a thing that broke my heart and mended it in the same second. He came to attention himself. A little crooked, a little unsure, the way a 6-year-old does it, copying a thing he has seen, heels together, back straight, and his own small hand came up to his own small brow, and he saluted the king's guard back. And only then, having received it, did the guard finish. He brought the salute down with the same control he'd brought it up, took up his rifle, came back to the slope, and resumed his beat, crack, crack, away down the line, leaving the boy standing a little taller in his gray coat in the middle of the forecourt, with the thing his father could not buy him given to him for free. I would like to tell you that the father understood what he had just seen. He did not. He understood only that he had been refused, and that the refusal had somehow been turned into a show that the crowd was now watching with shining eyes, and that he was, for the first time in a very long time, not the most important man at the railing. A child's salute had upstaged him, and a man like that cannot abide being upstaged by a child. "Oh, very nice," he said, and his voice had gone ugly. "Very touching. You'll perform for the cameras, but you won't take one photo when a paying visitor asks. Marcus, get over here, away from him." He grabbed the boy by the arm and pulled him back, and the boy went, the brief light going out of him, and I watched the small shoulders fold inward again. "We came here to see soldiers," the father announced to the rail at large, "and instead we get a stuck-up mannequin who thinks saluting a kid makes him a hero. Coward. You know what you are. You're a coward in a costume. You couldn't take a photo because you're scared of a phone. The guard's eyes were back on the point above our heads. He had returned to the place he went, the still water under everything. And the father, finding even his insults soaking into that silence without leaving a mark, did the thing that men like him always do when the world refuses to organize itself around them. He reached over the railing, past the brass plate, and he shoved the king's guard in the chest. It was not a tap. I want to be clear about that, because afterward there were people who tried to soften it, who said, well, he only gave him a little push. It was a two-handed shove from a large, angry man who had braced his feet, delivered to the chest of a soldier standing at the slope, and it was meant to knock him backward, to make the statue stumble, to prove in front of everyone that the man in the fur hat was just a man, and could be moved by a man who mattered more. The guard rocked, I saw it. The whole red column of him went back perhaps 2 inches, and the bearskin tipped. And for a 6-second, the morning balanced on the edge of becoming something terrible. And then he simply stood. The 2 inches came back. The boots found the stone. The rifle never wavered from the slope. He did not stagger. He did not raise a hand. He did not so much as turn his eyes down to the man who had laid hands on him. He took the shove the way the old wall behind him takes the wind, the way a thing takes an insult that cannot reach the place where it lives, and he stood, and his gaze went back up to its point in the sky, and the only evidence that anything had happened at all was the father, off balance now from his own thrown weight, half falling against the railing he had pushed off. The forecourt had gone completely silent. You have to understand how a crowd works, because it is the second most important thing that happened that morning. A crowd is not a single mind. A crowd is 100 separate people, each waiting to find out what everyone else thinks, each holding their own reaction half-formed, ready to follow whoever moves first. For 20 minutes that crowd had not known what to make of the loud man. He was rude, yes, but he was confident, and confidence is contagious. And a few people had laughed his nervous laugh, and a few more had simply looked away and decided it was none of their business. The crowd had been undecided. The shove decided it. The moment those 2 hands came down on the chest of a soldier who would not lift a finger to defend himself, the undecided crowd became a single thing, and that thing was disgust. I heard it go through the rail like a current, a sharp intake of breath, a woman's voice saying, "Oh, that's enough." A man near me muttering, "Did you see that? He pushed him. He actually pushed him." The phones came up. Not the way they'd come up for the loud man's performance. Those had come up for entertainment. These came up the way phones come up at an accident, fast and grim. A dozen of them, 2 dozen, every parent at that rail suddenly recording the man who had shoved a soldier in front of their children. The father felt the change. You always feel it, even when you don't understand it. He straightened up off the railing and looked around at the faces, expecting the room he had been playing to, and found instead 2 dozen people looking at him the way you look at something you've scraped off your shoe. "What?" he said. He had it coming, standing there ignoring my son like we're nothing. "You shoved him," a woman said flatly. She had a little girl on her shoulders. "We all saw it. You shoved a man who's not allowed to defend himself." "I barely touched him." "It's all on camera," someone else said. And then a new sound cut across the forecourt, and every head turned, and the father's bluster died in his throat. Because the thing about that post, the thing the father in his soft gray coat had never once considered, is that the soldier at the railing is not alone. He is the visible end of something very large and very old and very patient, and that morning the rest of it arrived. It came as boots, a lot of boots in step, coming fast from the arch beyond the forecourt, the unmistakable hard rhythm of men marching with purpose, not the slow ceremony of the changing of the guard, but the quick controlled urgency of a relief turning out, because a sentry has signaled trouble at his post. I learned later that the guard had a way of signaling without breaking, a position of the rifle, A fractional change in the carriage of the body, read by an observer none of us had noticed. A corporal of the watch standing in the shadow of the arch whose entire job was to watch the man who could not call for help. The shove had been seen. The shove had been logged. And the institution behind the red tunic did what institutions of honor do when one of their own is laid hands on. It came, in step, in numbers, immediately. 6 of them came through the arch at the quick march, a sergeant at their head, and the crowd parted, and the father, who 1 minute earlier had been promising to have a soldier cleaning latrines by the weekend, took an involuntary step backward and pulled his son against his leg. The sergeant was an older man, gray at the temples under his bearskin with a face like a closed gate. He did not run. He did not shout. He brought his men to a halt with a single word I didn't catch, posted 2 of them at the railing flanking the guard who had been shoved, who still, I will note, had not moved, had not looked, was still staring at his point in the sky as if none of this concerned him in the slightest, which in a sense it did not, because his job was to stand and he was standing. And then the sergeant walked, unhurried, to the place at the rail where the father stood and looked at him. "Sir," the sergeant said, and his voice was terribly polite, "did you put your hands on the sentry?" "He provoked me," the father said. The phone cameras were all on him now. "He was ignoring my son. Do you know who I am? I'm a personal friend of." "Did you put your hands on the sentry?" the sergeant said again, not a question this time. "In front of 40 witnesses and a dozen cameras, sir." "Because I have a man here whose orders forbid him from so much as turning his head to look at you, and I am watching the mark your hands left on the breast of his tunic, and I am going to ask you to remain exactly where you are standing until the constables arrive, which will be very shortly, because they were called the moment you raised your voice, and they were running the moment you raised your hands." The forecourt was so quiet I could hear the man's son breathing. "This is ridiculous," the father said, but the bottom had gone out of his voice. "It was a misunderstanding. The boy wanted a photo. I was advocating for my son." And it was then, and I have thought about this part most of all, that the sergeant did something I did not expect. He did not lecture the man. He did not enjoy him. He had every right to, and he did not. Instead, he looked down, for the first time, at the boy pressed against the father's leg, the small gray shape with the dried tears, and his closed-gate face did something almost imperceptible around the eyes, the way a hard man's face moves when he sees a child who has been somewhere a child should not have to be. "Is this your son, sir?" the sergeant asked. "Yes, Marcus." "What's that got to do with?" "Marcus," the sergeant said, ignoring the father entirely and crouching down, a grown man in full ceremonial dress, going down on one knee on the cobblestones of the forecourt, bearskin and all, so that his eyes were level with the boy's. "My name is Sergeant Pell. Did the soldier at the railing frighten you this morning?" The boy looked at him, then he shook his head, a small definite shake. "No." "No," Pell said gently. "He's very tall. He's allowed to be a little frightening." "He saluted me," the boy whispered. It was the first thing I'd heard the child say all morning. "He's not allowed to move, but he saluted me, so I saluted him back." "You did," said Sergeant Pell. "I heard. There's a corporal up in that arch who saw the whole thing, and he came and told me, and do you know what he said? He said, 'Sergeant, that sentry just gave the present to a small boy, and the small boy gave it straight back. Smartest I've seen it done all year.'" The sergeant's grave face creased just slightly. "We don't give that salute to many people, Marcus. We give it to kings. We give it to the flag. And this morning a soldier of the king decided to give it to you. Do you understand what that means?" The boy shook his head. "It means," said Sergeant Pell, "that he thinks you are very, very brave, braver than every grown-up at this railing, and he is right." The boy looked at the sergeant for a long moment. And then in the smallest voice, with his father standing speechless above him, he said, "I didn't want the photo. I just wanted to look at him. I didn't want anyone to shout." I will tell you that there was not a dry eye at that section of the railing. There were grown men, fathers, looking very fixedly at the cobblestones and blinking. The little girl on the woman's shoulders had her hand over her own mouth. And the father, the big man in the soft gray coat, the man who could buy the whole street, stood there with his mouth slightly open and absolutely nothing to say, because his own son had just told a kneeling soldier in front of 40 strangers the one thing he had never once been quiet enough to hear. I just wanted to look at him. I didn't want anyone to shout. The constables came then, 2 of them at a fast walk through the parting crowd, and the loud part of the morning began to wind down into the quiet, certain machinery that follows a man who has crossed a line he didn't know was there. The father tried, of course. They always try. He tried the phone call he had threatened the guard with, actually took the thing out and held it up like a weapon. I'm calling my lawyer, I'm calling everyone. You have no idea what you've started. And the senior constable, a patient woman with a notebook, simply waited for him to finish and then said, "You're very welcome to call anyone you like, sir, from the station. Right now I need you to come with me, because I have a sentry on guard duty with the print of your hands on his uniform and 40 people who watched you put it there. And that is an assault on a member of the household on duty, and it is not the kind of thing a phone call makes go away." It was a misunderstanding, the father said, for the 3rd time, and it had stopped being an argument and become something closer to a prayer. "Then you can explain the misunderstanding at the station," the constable said, "and we'll all be glad to hear it." And here is where I expected the story to end, because in my experience this is where stories like this do end, with the bad man led away, and the crowd murmuring its satisfaction, and everyone going home feeling that the world had, for once, balanced its books. The karma had landed. The bully was getting exactly what bullies in these stories are supposed to get. I was already composing the version I would tell my wife that night, the one with the satisfying ending. The man in the soft gray coat marched off to answer for himself. But the morning was not finished, and the part that was left is the part I actually carry. Because as the constable moved to take the father's arm, the boy little Marcus, who had wanted only to look at the soldier, began to cry again. Not the silent tears this time. Real crying, a child's whole body crying, because whatever his father was, he was the boy's father, and he was being taken away by police in front of everyone, and a 6-year-old's heart does not run the books the way the crowd's heart does. The boy did not feel justice. He felt the bottom dropping out of his small world. He grabbed for the gray coat and held on and sobbed, "Daddy, no, don't go, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have wanted the photo." And the whole satisfied crowd, the whole balance books crowd, went quiet in a different way, because there is nothing in the world that empties the satisfaction out of justice faster than a child blaming himself for it. What happened next is the thing I will believe in for the rest of my life. The king's guard broke his post. I don't mean he abandoned it. I mean he did the rarest thing a sentry can do, the thing that exists in the regulations as a near impossibility, reserved for the gravest reasons. He requested, by some signal I didn't see, and was granted by Sergeant Pell's single sharp nod, permission to leave his beat, and he came off it. He stepped back from the railing, and he handed his rifle to the man Pell had posted beside him with a precision that did not waver even now, and he walked, the towering red figure, the bearskin, the white gloves, across the open cobblestones of the forecourt to where the boy stood sobbing into his father's coat. And he knelt, the second soldier of the morning to go down on one knee on that cold stone, and this one the one who had been shoved, the one who had every reason in the world to stand back and let the loud man face his music. He knelt down to the boy's height, and he took off one white glove slowly, finger by finger, the way you do a careful thing, and he held out his bare hand, a young man's hand, ordinary, and he said the first words I had heard him speak all morning. "Soldier," he said, his voice was quiet and even, "look at me a moment." The boy turned, hiccuping, his face a wreck. "You did everything right this morning," the guard said. Do you hear me? Everything. You were polite. You were patient. You were braver than I was because I had a hat and a rifle and 100 years of men standing behind me, and you had none of that, and you still stood your ground in the middle of it. None of what happened is your fault. Not the shouting. Not where your father is going. A grown man made his own choices today, and a man your size is not responsible for the choices of a man my size. Do you understand? The boy stared at him. But I wanted the photo, he whispered. If I didn't want the photo. Wanting to look at a soldier, the guard said, is one of the best wishes a boy can have. It is the same wish I had, at exactly your age, when my own father lifted me up to see the guard at a railing just like this one. It is the reason I am wearing this coat today. There is nothing wrong with your wish. There was something wrong with how a grown man answered it. Those are very different things, and I need you to keep them separate in your heart, because if you let them get tangled up, you will spend years thinking you did something wrong, and you did not do one single thing wrong. Say it back to me. I didn't do anything wrong. The boy's lip trembled. I didn't do anything wrong. Again, like you mean it. Like a soldier. I didn't do anything wrong, the boy said, and his back straightened a little as he said it, and the guard nodded once gravely, the way you nod at a man who has passed an inspection. Then the guard looked up, and only now, for the first time all morning, he looked at the father. Not with anger. That was the thing that undid the man, I think. If the soldier had glared at him, the father could have glared back, could have rebuilt himself out of the argument. But the guard looked at him the way you look at a man you feel sorry for, and there is no defense in the world against being pitied by the person you tried to humiliate. Sir, the guard said quietly, kneeling there with the father's son's hand now resting trustingly in his bare one, I could not take your photograph this morning. Not because I am proud, and not because I think I am better than you. I could not take it because the moment I step off this post to pose for one man who shouts, I have told every quiet family at this railing that the way to be served here is to shout the loudest. And then your son learns that lesson too. He learns that the man who threatens gets what he wants. I will not teach him that. He is worth more than that lesson. He paused. You have a remarkable boy. He has been the most disciplined person in this forecourt for the last 20 minutes, and he did it with no training and no uniform and a great deal of fear, simply because it was the right way to behave. I would be proud past speaking if he were mine. I hope, when all of this is sorted out, you find a way to be the kind of father a boy like that deserves. That is the only photograph worth having. And then he did take a photograph. He looked up at the woman with the little girl on her shoulders, the one who had spoken first, and he said, Madam, would you do something for me? And she came forward with her phone, and the king's guard stayed on his knee beside little Marcus, and he put his bare hand gently on the boy's shoulder, asking first, looking at the boy, who nodded, and he let her take one picture. The boy and the soldier. No towering, no fur hat looming, just a young man on one knee and a small boy standing tall, the two of them at the same height, both of them, for that one frame, exactly as brave as each other. It was the photograph the father had demanded and could not get, and it only existed because he had stopped being the one who decided. They took the man away after that. I want to be honest and tell you it was not dramatic. There were no further threats. The bluster had gone out of him entirely, the way air goes out of a thing, and he went with the constables quietly, looking back once at his son, and on his face was an expression I had never seen on a man like that before and have rarely seen since. It was the look of a man who has just been shown, with perfect clarity and no cruelty at all, the exact size of his own smallness. That is a heavier sentence than any court hands down. The court, I heard later, bound him over and fined him, and noted that an assault on a sentry of the household on guard duty is taken with particular seriousness. But the real humbling had already happened, on the cobblestones, in front of his own child, delivered by a man on one knee who had refused to give him so much as a glare to fight against. The boy went home with his grandmother, who came for him within the hour, A small, brisk woman who took one look at the situation, gathered the child up, and thanked Sergeant Pell with the kind of quiet dignity that told you exactly where the good in that family lived. As she carried the boy past me toward the gate, little Marcus was looking back over her shoulder at the railing, where the King's Guard gloved again now, rifle returned, restored to the slope as if none of it had ever happened, stood his post, eyes forward, immovable. And as the boy watched, the guard's eyes came down for 1/2 second, the way they had at the very beginning, and found the small gray shape being carried away, and held it, and then went back up to the sky. I do not think the boy will spend his life believing he did something wrong. I have to believe that. It is the thing the soldier worked hardest of all to give him, harder than the salute, harder than the kneeling, the simple separation of the boy's innocent wish from his father's ugly choice, pressed into him firmly enough that I think it took. Say it back to me. Like a soldier, I didn't do anything wrong. I have thought a great deal in the years since about what I actually witnessed that morning, and I have decided it was not what I first believed. I thought I had watched a bully get what he deserved, and I had, but that was the smallest part of it. What I had really watched was a demonstration, clean, controlled, and total, of the difference between power and force. The father had force. He had money and volume and the willingness to put his hands on a man who would not hit back, and force is loud, and force gets the room's attention, and force, in the end, gets you led away by 2 patient constables while your son cries into your coat. The soldier had power. He had a discipline so complete that he could be shoved in the chest and not stumble, a restraint so deep that he could be insulted by a man and answer only a frightened child, an authority so quiet that he never raised his voice once, and yet by the end of the morning, he was the only person in the forecourt whose name that boy will remember. Force makes a man do what you want. Power makes a man want to be better. The father spent the morning trying to make the soldier move. The soldier spent the morning making a boy stand taller. Only one of them succeeded, and it was not the one with the watch worth a car. My own son was born the following spring, as I said. He is old enough now to come with me to the railings, and we go sometimes on a cold, bright morning, and we stand a respectful half-step back and we watch the King's Guard hold his post. The red wool, the bearskin, the white gloves, the gaze fixed on something the rest of us cannot see. My boy asks me why the soldier doesn't move. And I tell him the truth I learned standing 4 feet from a man in a soft gray coat who thought a soldier was a thing he had paid for. I tell him he doesn't move so that the loudest man never wins. He stands still so that the quietest child is safe. That is the whole of it, and it is the bravest thing I have ever seen a man do, and he does it every single morning, and almost no one ever knows his name. And then we stand there together, my son and I, a respectful half-step back, and we watch the man who will not be moved, and I teach my boy to be still.